And Tammy, do you want me to share those links for the evaluation?
I was just thinking about that. So yes, if you can throw those in there and I'll touch on that as
Okay.
well as the handouts.
Got it.
Hi, Renee.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Hey, Renee.
Well, I'm excited for your presentation today.
Great. We're excited to present.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. I may have deleted that email, but I'll search for it.
I could go back and find it.
Yeah.
That's all right. I think I got it. Yep, I got it.
Okay.
Great.
Evaluations before and after, at the beginning and end.
Yeah. I mean, it's just an evaluation for like if they can do it as soon as, we wrap up, that would be great.
Okay, I think we'll get started. All right, welcome everyone to the Special Ed Legal Clinic. This month's workshop is Understanding Autism, which will be put on by Tammy Sebastian and Aaron Hinkle from OCECD. The Special Ed Legal Clinic is a collaboration between Albite Weicker, Disability Rights Ohio, and the Coalition. And we do a series of workshops that we schedule about every 6 months, and we are in maybe the 7th or 8th in this series. And again, we schedule every month. You can schedule at www.lawyers4students.com/legal clinic. That's where you scheduled or registered for this workshop, and you can register for this and others coming up. And we're about to publish a new series soon, within probably a month or so. And you can also sign up at the same link for individual guidance sessions, which are 30-minute sessions with an advocate or attorney from one of the 3 organizations. And we have those immediately following the workshops typically. So we have some. If you've registered for one of those, you'll have a separate link, which you'll click on, and we'll see you at 1, 1:30, 2, or 2:30 after the workshop. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Tammy Sebastian from OCECD.
Thanks, Mark. Well, welcome everyone. I know we've had a big shift in the weather today, so I'm hoping this doesn't stay long, but nevertheless, it is April in Ohio, but that also means April is Autism Acceptance Month, and I thought that was really great that we could host this training during April, and the Ohio Coalition is so happy to have the partnership with Albite Weicker and Disability Rights Ohio to present these series to you all. So with that being said, just want to tell you a little bit about the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities. If you are not aware, and you can go ahead and throw in the chat if you've heard of us before, if you've attended a training. I will not go very long into about us because we only have an hour today, but just a brief explanation of what we do. We are the Parent Training Information Center for the state of Ohio under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Every state has to have a Parent Training Information Center. And we are that for the state of Ohio. We help parents by providing resources, trainings like we're doing today, and technical assistance. A little bit about me, and then I'm going to hand it over to Aaron, then Aaron's going to hand it back over to me. And again, I said, my name is Tammy Sebastian. I am the statewide program coordinator for the Ohio Coalition. I am also a parent of 2 individuals with disabilities, my oldest daughter with ADHD and my youngest daughter with autism, generalized anxiety disorder, and sensory processing disorder. And I will go ahead and hand it over to Erin, and then she'll pass it back to me. Erin.
Sounds great. Thanks, Tammy. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here today. I'm excited to do this presentation. I'm an information specialist and trainer for West Central Ohio for the Ohio Coalition. I have 2 children. I have an 18-year-old son who is on the autism spectrum and he's transitioning. So big times right now for him. And I have a 12-year-old daughter with anxiety. And so very happy to be here today.
Great. Thank you, Erin. So we will go ahead and get started. Before we do, I just want to let you know we are going to be hearing from a young gentleman, a young man named Taylor Crow, throughout the series of throughout the training. He's going to talk about his perspective. We just want to front load some information here. This is a very old video. We are in the process of updating it. But we felt Taylor's story was so strong. So I just want to say there is some language in here that we no longer use, but try to just go past that language because we're really looking for you to get from Taylor's perspective, his life with autism. So just wanted to let you know there is some dated language in here and we are working on getting some updated language. So with that being said, we're going to talk about understanding autism. And we know that autism is a complex neurological disorder. And most scientists, the jury's out. We've heard many communities, many research studies on where or what they believe ASD, where that cause is from. And we've learned that there are many different, or I should say multiple types of ASD or autism spectrum disorder. And there may be many different factors that play into it. Some of them can be environmental, there could be genetic factors. We are not here as doctors or scientists, but just to give you that background on it, or you just already may be aware, which may make a child more likely to have autism. So in our training today, we're going to discuss the prevalence, some of the diagnostic criteria for ASD or autism spectrum disorder, and we will review the differences between mental health definition, so the DSM, and educational definition. We have a lot of conversation about that, especially when we're talking about school and identifying under the disability category of autism. And we're also going to talk about the areas that are typically affected by autism, social interactions, communications, maybe some behavioral concerns as well. But we will not be discussing today. We're not really going deep into the methodologies or the school services. We do have other trainings, such as our IEP training, our evaluation training that covers that in depth. And we also did provide in the handouts, there is a handout for the Autism Scholarship Program that goes in a little bit deeper with that in case you're interested. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Erin, and she's going to introduce Taylor
Crow. Yeah,
Yes.
so just like Tammy just said, before we show this video, we just want to bring your attention to the fact that there is some outdated language that's used in the video, but however, we felt this video was still important to show, and the message that Taylor brings is impactful, and we still want you to see this video just for that consideration that some of the language is a little bit older in it, but still a very useful video.
Thank you, Erin. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear him.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Taylor Crow. I have autism. You might not notice my autism very much, and that's part of the story I'm about to tell. First, I want to talk about autism. All people with autism share common traits that define them as being autistic. But people with autism, like people in general, can be very different from one another. Some people with autism have mental retardation, while others are extremely intelligent. Some can talk, and some can't. Some are even geniuses. Some children are born with autism, and their parents know something is different from the very start. Some children with autism seem to have a perfectly normal childhood until age 2 or so. Then their autism appears. Some children with the form of autism known as Asperger's syndrome often aren't diagnosed until they are in grade school. That's when difficulties socially interacting with others begin to show up. I was one of those kids who seemed to have a perfectly normal childhood at first.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Now, I, M, A, B, C. Tell me what you think of.
I think you're wonderful.
These days, about 2/3 of children diagnosed with autism have apparently normal early development before their symptoms appear. Look at this. It's a home video of my 2nd birthday.
Oscar, well, it's around somewhere.
Tweety bird.
Tweety bird, that's right. That's
Beep,
right. Beep, beep, that's a road runner. Taylor, you're so smart.
Now you're going to see me 2 years later, on my 4th birthday. By this time I had changed. My autism had taken hold around age 3. Language was hard for me. I could only speak in short sentences. I was easily upset and terribly unhappy a lot of the time. I had a Mickey Mouse cake for my birthday that year. Usually seeing Mickey made me happy, but here I panicked because Mickey was going to be cut up. I couldn't help this. After my autism appeared, I wanted things a certain way, exactly and only the way I thought they should be. It was years before I could come even close to the language skills I had when I was 2. Even now it can be hard for me to express myself or keep up with conversations. There are lots of people with autism. Understanding who we are and how to help us is very important. A good way to start is to recognize that we can't help the way we are. It's just how we're built. And never forget this: every child with autism is a child. Every person with autism is a person. Please treat us like you would want to be treated.
Okay. Let me just see if I can transition back. Are you seeing my,
No notes. No, you're good.
and you are seeing the next slide?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
We did it. You did it.
All right. And I'm just wondering, and go ahead and throw in the chat if you are a parent of an individual with autism, or an individual with autism. Do you
autism, right?
Do you relate to that? So far, what we've showed you, or anything that any comments you want to make about that video? Go ahead and throw that in the chat. And I don't know if you can see it or not, if there's anything in there, Aaron. So a little bit about, we talked about the diagnostic, or the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is called the DSM. And it's the guidebook that's used by clinicians and researchers to diagnose children and adults. It's a living document that periodically changes to reflect new research and ongoing psychiatric practices. With that being said, if you heard Taylor and we talked about that old language, he also used Asperger's, which is no longer in the DSM. And that's why we are very We want to make sure that we say that the DSM is a living document and that it does periodically change. And there are people that have those diagnoses of Asperger's that they did not lose those. So it's very important that we understand that. I think something's in the Q&A. Are you able to see that, Erin?
Yeah, let me look. It says, hi, the chat, is disabled. I found the scene of him having a meltdown over the cake. Very relatable to my experiences with my daughter.
Great, great. I'm glad you were able to identify with that. Was there another one? I'm sorry.
No, my daughter is on the spectrum and Taylor's experience was very similar to my daughter. So yeah.
Good. We're glad that
Yep.
that's the point of this, to be able to relate to that.
Yeah.
And we'll see more from Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
So just a little bit more about the DSM-5. It was recently updated to include changes to the definition of autism. And a lot of experts are saying will further clarify the diagnoses. However, they are saying there are minor tweaks. There's a lot of discussion. It's a lot of controversy around it about the definition. But there is a lot of discussion on further updates to the DSM that the autism self-advocates are making sure that they are involved in any changes. We want to honor that. That's why we are making sure, even with this presentation, that we have an individual speaking from their experience, and they should be included in those conversations in the DSM. And they are really concerned, the autistic community is really concerned of changes becoming way too narrow. Just one thing we want to make sure we say is when we use the term autism spectrum disorder, we are referring, and we will talk about this, and Erin will go a little bit more in depth into an entire spectrum. That's what we're talking about. And individuals on the spectrum are extremely variable. And we also included in that handout, I think there's the levels where they have leveled the autism levels that some practitioners use, some do not, level 1, level 2, level 3. So go ahead and look at that. And I will hand it over to Erin to talk more about the spectrum.
Okay, the autism spectrum. I love this graphic that we had made for this presentation because it really does show that autism spectrum disorder usually doesn't come alone. There's a broad range of conditions that may come along with autism. And this visual, I just think it shows it very nicely and explains maybe challenges such as communication, social skills, behaviors that make up the autism spectrum, spectrum. Instead of thinking of autism as a rainbow arch with a beginning and an end, which sometimes stigmatizes that there's some hierarchy in autism spectrum disorder. There's not. All of these different can travel and be a part of that person with autism may have depression, they may have anxiety, and not everyone's a little bit different, but many a times you may have one of these other things that come along with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Kristen, I know I do see something in here that I just want to see in the Q&A. It says we're being met with resistance from school to have autism added to her IEP. They are stating our daughter is fine at home, but she's in tears at home at the moment she leaves school. So we're gonna talk a little bit about the difference between. I think we go into
Medical.
that later. If we don't, we will definitely hit on the difference between the medical and school and the impact it has to have in school. So we will talk about that. Thank you for mentioning that. All right. So typically there are 3 areas that are affected by autism: social interaction, communication, behavior, maybe repetitive behavior, could be stereotyped behavior, sensory behaviors or interests. Keep in mind that each child you encounter with autism may have issues in these 3 areas, but they will all be quite different. So no 2 will be the same. So that is when we talk about the spectrum, that is why, we say if you've met one individual with autism, you've met one individual with autism, and especially when we're looking at those areas. We also have supplemental information I think we've provided in the handouts as well. If not, I'm going to go ahead and I'll share that with you about executive functioning difficulties also when you talk about executive functioning. And that is, I like to say that's the CEO of the brain. So when you struggle with those areas, that also a lot of individuals with autism also struggle with those executive functioning issues.
Yeah, keeping their whole life together.
That's it. That's it.
Yes.
Yep.
So
Okay.
just some autism facts. Autism is 4.5 times more prevalent in boys than girls. Girls are less likely to be identified and diagnosed than boys. A lot of times girls will be a little bit later, even in the preteen, by the time they do get a diagnosis. Researchers have found that girls on the autism spectrum can show significantly fewer stereotyped and repetitive behaviors than boys. And that is why a lot of times they're diagnosed later. They're not quite as easily seen. And they are more likely to have special interests centered in people and relationships, where boys will have those special interests. Like my son loves airplanes and knows every single commercial airline out there. And he knows when flights, all the flight patterns, he knows them. And we actually go to the airport and watch them. But his is more not in people that he's focused on. It's things and things of interest to him. So it's kind of interesting. Autism affects all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds. It is one of the most inheritable neurodevelopment disorders. If identical twins are born and one twin has autism, there's a 9 in 10 chance that the other twin will have it also, which is pretty huge, that genetic underlining piece. And if a sibling has autism, there's a 35% chance that the other siblings will be diagnosed with autism as well. And this year, the CDC did put out some numbers that 1 in 36 now are being diagnosed with autism. So it's just a little uptick in the number.
And Aaron and I don't want to go into our TED talk about this
No.
or our podcast, because we could spend, and we
Couple
did
days.
every time we review this training, we talk, and we've had many conversations being parents of individuals with autism on what we think.
Yeah.
You know,
Why that is upticking,
why,
right?
yeah, why the 1 in 36? I think we could all open that up and have conversations. We've heard a lot about having more knowledge, but we've also seen we've seen a lot of different changes within our world, our environment. There's so many different things going on.
Yeah.
And Erin, thank you so much. And I love when I present this with Erin. It really works because she is a parent of a boy.
Yeah.
And I'm a parent of a girl. So and it's absolutely true about the relationships with girls being more of the interest. And then, we won't go into a whole lot of masking, but girls and the later diagnosis with girls is because of the masking and being able to emulate those social situations very well to an extent. So I love these facts because it really sheds a light on the differences between boys and girls on the spectrum. So that being said, we will talk. I knew it was coming. This should have been your slide.
I know, it
Ingrid
should have been.
actually wrote. So feel for you to hop in. We actually have resources, and we actually did a training specifically on the educational definition of autism, education versus medical. So we also do have in the handout in that link, and in there is the educational definition under the Ohio operating standards, which are the rules that come from the federal regulations, which is under IDEA. And that tells you what the educational definition of autism is. The DSM-5 gives us a medical diagnosis, and the operating standards give us the educational definition. And while a medical diagnosis is not required for a school district to determine whether or not a child's eligible, it is helpful. So you don't even need the diagnosis, honestly, in order to get that, for them to qualify under that category. However, even though on the flip side of that, even though a child may not have a medical diagnosis, they may still qualify. But on the flip side, they could have a diagnosis of autism and not have an educational impact. And I do understand where, and this has happened to me as well. So it, they could be holding it in all day, and then coming home and melting down, and we hear that a lot. But if it's not impacting them in a way where it is affecting them educationally, and that they need supports in place at school, there's really that's where we come into the difference between whether or not they need to qualify under autism as far as needing an IEP. If they are struggling with social, communication, behaviors, and they are happening within the school environment, then we can do something about those.
Right.
Erin, I don't know if you wanted to add anything here.
No, and it really is just about that educational impact and not being able to access that general ed curriculum at school if those behaviors or communication are getting in the way. I have known kids that were diagnosed with autism medically and did not qualify for an IEP at school, that they actually got through their day and didn't need the specially designed instruction and supports for their day. So just because you have a medical diagnosis doesn't just preclude you to, oh, I'm going to get an IEP at school. I'm just going to get specially designed instruction. It doesn't. You still need to go through that evaluation at your school and see what the needs of that child are.
And that's really, and thank you for hitting that too. When they do the evaluation, that would identify what those needs are.
Yeah.
And whether or not there is an educational impact. It could just be a 504 where they might need supports in school.
Accommodations,
like, yeah, sensory breaks. So I would really encourage you to really think about what that impact looks like in school. And if there's not an impact, and they are coming home and melting down, or they are coming home and struggling with behaviors, then maybe looking at a 504. Do they need sensory breaks built in at school? You can certainly look at whether or not they might need OT. And so there, or occupational therapy. So there's lots of different ways to look at it, but thank you, Erin, for hitting that. It's the evaluation would really tell us whether or not there's an educational impact. So.
And then, Tammy, Mark Weicker, he just said, yes, the educational definition is included in our handouts. Nikki, she said, how can autism not impact a child at school? It's part of who they are. And she said, this is exactly where we are. We do not have an IEP, even though we have a medical diagnosis, but the school is refusing to initiate. We have an educational impact, but the school says they are too busy with too many kids. Okay, that's not good.
No, and I would encourage you to reach out with that.
Reach out to
I just
us.
want to do,
Yeah.
I do want to just address how a child with autism could not be impacted at school. And it is part of who they are. Because some of those things do not, and so my daughter, who is on the autism spectrum, only needed a 504 because she just needed accommodations. It didn't rise to the level where, and when we're talking about educational impact, we're talking about whether or not they need specially designed instruction in order to access the curriculum. And there are children that are on the spectrum, and my daughter was fortunate enough to be able to academically do very well. And the impact around her sensory issues and everything else was able to be accommodated by a 504. And so that's when we talk about individuals on the spectrum being having, such a very different needs. That's how you could have a child on the spectrum and not having an we're not saying they're not impacted by the autism. We're saying that they're not having an educational impact. So
and if you're having any move on, but I said, if you're having any issues with your districts, I mean, that's why we are here.
Please reach out
to us. We'll go through your case on an individual basis and get any questions that you really have answered. So, but thank you for the questions.
Yeah. And we'll throw the at the end, we can throw our phone number in for our intake, and you can reach out to Martha Laze and she can hook you up with whoever in your area.
Sounds great. Thank
Yep.
you. Okay, so potential early signs of autism. There are potential signs not necessarily indicative of an autism diagnosis. A baby does not babble or coo or does not gesture, point, wave, or smile by 1 year old. I know that was a lot of things that my son didn't do by 1, so that we were all looking for. Does not say single words by 16 months old, and does not say 2-word phrases on their own, or loses language or social skills after having acquired them. So, and I love this little graphic because it really just shows and kind of breaks it out nicely. Just the different things like, hey, my kid isn't pointing yet, or they're not saying 2-word phrases, just things that just to be aware of, that, hey, maybe we need to look at things a little bit closer.
Thank you, Erin. And now we're going to hop back to Taylor. And we're going to watch Taylor share some more about his journey. And just give me another thumbs up if you can hear him. Yep. Okay. Yep.
Through the years, I've overheard people say things like, it's hard to imagine what it must be like to be the parent of a perfectly normal child who then becomes autistic. Instead, they should try to imagine being that child. Imagine a world that doesn't make sense anymore. A world that has become intensely uncomfortable and you can't explain what's going on. A lot of times with autism, parents and doctors think a child has developed hearing problems because he or she doesn't respond when spoken to. Look at this video of me when I was almost 6 years old.
What you doing, Tay? Taylor Crow, look right here at the camera. Taylor. What you making? What you making, sweetie?
Let's look at that scene again. There's something else to notice. Even when I make eye contact, it's only for an instance. Eye contact is hard to do when you're autistic. I had to practice eye contact for years, and I still struggle with it. Seeing that particular video clip makes me realize how hard it must have been for my brother, too. When I was a preschooler, before I had any speech therapy, I would hardly talk at all, unless I was upset. But here's something very interesting. Certain activities made it much easier for me to talk. My parents discovered that swinging would relax me and allowed me to communicate more easily. In those days, when the swinging stopped, my talking stopped. Now watch this. Here I am a few minutes later, not swinging.
Hi, Taylor.
I'm not talking and I'm not responding to Dad.
Hi, Taylor.
Here I am later, the same day, swinging again and talking again.
And there's Taylor back on a swing, one of his favorite things to do.
Even as an adult, I still like to swing, and I still enjoy certain carnival rides. They feel good and relax me. This is interesting because many scientists who have studied autism say it's a disorder of the senses. In fact, much of the treatment for autism is aimed at working with the different senses. Earlier you saw the video clip where it seemed like I wasn't able to hear. Actually, I could hear very well, sometimes too well. Certain sounds bothered me. Here's an example. I love parades. I never wanted to miss one, but sometimes the sounds were overwhelming. The sense of smell can be affected in autism too. Look at this video of me coming to my grandparents' house for my 7th birthday. I didn't want to sneak a taste. I wanted to smell the cake instead. Sometimes the sense of touch was hard on me too. Hugging was often uncomfortable. In fact, just being touched was a problem. A lot of people with autism will flap their arms at times, which seems to have something to do with stimulating senses that aren't working properly. Look at this.
The balloon. What did it say?
Taylor, roll it outside and see if you can ride it.
There they go.
There they go.
Bye, balloon.
Bye, balloon.
Repeating exactly word for word what is said to you is called echolalia. I did this a lot. Sometimes it's the only language an autistic person is capable of.
4 balls.
Forward ball. Forward ball. Forward ball.
Every person with autism has some form of difficulty with communication. In my case, I went from having normal speech as a 2-year-old to hardly being able to talk at all.
Okay. Let's see. We still good? Can you see the next slide?
You can see the next one. I think some people had difficulty hearing our video. But
Oh,
I
no.
know, I'm not sure, but
Yeah, we heard it just fine. just so
Okay.
Oh,
you
you
know.
did?
Okay.
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 I'm not sure if
Okay.
that was a problem for everybody. At least one person said that though.
okay,
Okay.
okay, good.
All right.
Okay,
Is this your slide?
I think it
Erin?
is.
Okay, go ahead.
Or it could be yours, doesn't matter. So social interaction is huge in autism, and it is very hard for people on the spectrum to make little or no eye contact. I know my son yesterday was at Dairy Queen with a social group, and the man that runs it was talking to Connor and asking him about the movie, and it was very hard for Connor to have that eye contact. He kind of kept moving his body. He answered, but it was not easy. For a lot of people on the spectrum prefer that alone time. Alone time can be a time to recharge. Just don't want to leave them alone too long and have too much of that. Um, for social interaction, so often it's that hidden curriculum that we've all learned that, with important for social skills that we all just pick up naturally. That we don't have to be taught explicitly, but for someone on the spectrum, that eye contact and, knowing those rules, they don't pick that up just in a natural setting. These assumed rules, adult or student expectations, idioms, metaphors, like all of that needs to be taught to a child or an adult. Understanding the hidden curriculum may be especially difficult for, individuals with autism. For like an example, restroom behaviors for males using a urinal. The norm for a man is to go to the most distant urinal. An individual with autism really isn't going to get that, and they may not understand this, and they select the urinal directly next to that individual that's already using the urinal. Individuals with autism may need to be taught socially appropriate norms that individuals with autism, we just learn. And very purposeful instruction in modeling so they can learn those behaviors. This can be extremely challenging in school. A teacher may say it's quiet time for reading, and everyone just takes out their book and begins to read at their desk. And that child with autism usually would probably need to be told, take your book out, read. It's that very explicit instruction. So yeah.
And I can just tell you, with my daughter, with the social interaction too, and especially because girls are different, she really learned, and that's what we talked about with masking. She learned, she would watch the social interactions and
Yeah.
be able to learn from that, or just being able to watch things online. From different things, different videos. So there's many different ways, depending on, that individual on
Yeah.
how that social interactions affected. Thank you. Oh, and we're going to talk a little bit more too about it. So some of the other examples are you seeing, I'm sorry, Erin, are you
Yes,
just seeing
it's-
my
yep.
PowerPoint?
Social
Okay.
interaction. Yep.
Okay,
Just no
so
notes.
no, okay. So just interpreting facial expressions and body language could be another example. Understanding personal space and boundaries could be another example. How their actions and this one really bothers me. We've heard a lot of stigmatic conversations or stigmatization on whether or not individuals with autism have empathy, and I think that's furthest from the truth. They absolutely do have empathy. It's just knowing that impact and how their actions affect others. And I think Erin was talking too about just having that explicit conversation and understanding their concrete thinking. Sometimes you just have to unpack those things, but it doesn't mean that they lack empathy. Understanding emotions is another huge example of really being able to rely on just somebody's emotions and where they're at. And then sometimes playing games, winning, losing, turn taking, that's huge too. So those are some other examples of social interaction.
You know,
Did you
it's
wanna add
funny.
something, Erin?
Yeah, I was gonna say too, it's funny with my son, he'll come up to me and say, Mom, are you sad? Are you, and you know, because he's not quite sure, where someone else might automatically know. So they
Yes.
kind of check with you and then they're like, oh, can I help you? Can I, you know, and yes, they do feel empathy. It's just done in a little bit different of a way and they ask a little bit different. So
Right. Or it's either, or it could be unpacking a lot. I see with
Yeah.
my daughter, it's what did I do? I didn't know what I did.
Yeah.
And so it's unpacking and saying, you know, this is and going through and showing her this is where you might have missed.
Yes, yes.
So
And I
yeah,
know
but
someone just commented too, my daughter struggles tremendously with losing. Yeah, we see that a lot with our kids.
huge.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
But
Okay.
it's definitely, and that's a lot of that's a lot of role playing and
Mhm.
turn taking and a lot of again that real intentional explicit instruction. So
Yes, and losing's hard, and
yeah,
that's a hard one to learn, that sometimes we do lose. It's
it's
not
hard for
easy.
me.
Yeah, it's hard for all of us.
Yeah.
So
Is this you?
strategies
Yeah.
for teaching social skills, and like we said, social skills can be taught, but they need to be explicit and they need to be able to practice them and they need to be able to see them. And so children need to gain the understanding of why social skills are so important. At the same time, they're learning appropriate social skills. So it has to be explicit instruction. A child should never be punished for making a social error. The appropriate skill needs to be taught. So, you know, we're teaching and building those skills. We're never going to make them feel bad about making that error. You know, help them see maybe why that error was inappropriate. Maybe it was an inappropriate comment, but to learn from that. So, you know, you don't keep making those errors. Social skills training needs to be built into a curriculum and taught to the student through lessons, role playing, practice, videos, any of that. But they need to be able to really practice and practice with other peers also. When providing scripts for role playing, provide the exact words you want the student to use. Social stories are another great tool. The social skills teach children with autism related disabilities. Social stories provide an individual with accurate information about certain situations that they may find difficult and confusing. The goal of the story is to increase the individual understanding of them, make that child more comfortable, and possibly suggest some appropriate responses for the situation that's in question. I know many times we use social stories for things that are coming up that, you know, field trip behaviors or some behavior like, hey, we're going to go to the dentist. And how is that going to go? And how are we going to feel? No, but I mean, a social story
I'm
can
going to
be
have to
great.
use it today, Erin.
I'll be writing it for you.
Yes.
But those can be great ways to curb anxiety and, hey, we're going to have a successful dentist trip. So social stories definitely is a great tool to use with kids on the spectrum. The picture exchange symbol system are typically good choices that can be used, especially in the school setting. For beginner readers, the PEC symbols, they're just simple black drawings that are substitutes for written words that have not been mastered, but a kid can point to it and say, this is what I want. I need a pen or I need a drink, and you can point to those, and that is just opens up communication. You know, you can do social stories on tape, you know, and you can do video scripts. You can video interactions and the kids can watch them and see what was done right. And then maybe they can pick out what was done wrong and then actually act it out in real life. So all of those are just different strategies for teaching social skills.
Perfect. Thank you, Erin. And yeah, and I just wanted to say too, I'm sorry, going back to that. I just wanted to say that building on positive interactions
Yes.
too. And sometimes you start small get a positive experience, and then add more.
Mhm.
It's always good, especially when you're trying to build that, those positive experiences. So for communication, we're going to talk about some ways that communication may be affected with individuals with autism. So difficulty, I'm sorry, I did not put my context in this morning. So difficulty expressing needs, the delayed speech or maybe no speech. And the speech can be affected in different ways, communication. Also, you heard Taylor Crow talk a lot about the echolalia and is maybe not responding to verbal cues. So those are some of the different ways. And I think Taylor did a great job of touching on some of those areas of communication. And Erin's going to talk a little bit more about communication here.
Yeah. So communication and social skills, they're tightly interwoven. Time and amount of language development skills will vary from child to child. The following is a list of ways that an individual may communicate. So motoric, direct physical manipulation of a person or object, taking that person's hand and pushing it towards a desired object, giving a cup to a caregiver. Hey, I want a drink. So actually pushing that person or, moving that person. Gestural pointing, showing or gaze, a gaze shift. The child looks or points at a desired object, then shifts gaze to another person, just so they know different type of communication. Vocalization, using of sounds, including crying to communicate. A child says, to draw attention to, another person's attention to what they want and what they're trying to show them. Sign language, and then using objects. The child may hand an object to another person to communicate. You hand them a cup or you hand them a toy. No, this is something that I want to do. Using photos can be a good one, and the use of two-dimensional photos to communicate. You point to the different photos or objects, and that communicates their desires. I did that with my son before he was talking. We had little food pictures lined up and toy pictures, and he would go get that picture, and it helps a lot to try to get that communication going, so we didn't have as many temper tantrums. Pictorial use of two-dimensional little drawings which represent objects, actions, or events. A child will hand a line drawing of a swing to his parents to indicate he wants to swing. And then, written words. As they get older, it may just be written words or phrases to communicate, like, this is too loud, I'm going to need a break. So just those different types of modes of communication.
And I am so sorry, Erin, I did not mean to switch
You're
that
fine.
slide so soon.
You're like moving along. No.
Yeah, no, honestly. Well, we do
You're
have
good.
only 10 minutes, so we are going to just touch on some of these areas and not really go too in depth. There are tons of resources for strategies. And I think we have some here: music therapy, using first then boards, choice boards. I think, Erin, you talked about sign language, ASL, very important. And then also music therapy and sensory integration are some of those other areas or strategies to teach communication.
So yeah, behavior may have repetitive or stereotype behavior, sensory behaviors of interest. If meltdowns occur at home, especially after returning from home from school, something in the school environment or bus may be triggering behavior. Behavior is just a way to communicate. So it's getting kind of to the bottom of that communication. What is bugging that kid? What is the trigger? A person with autism processes information differently and may feel overwhelmed and frightened by new places and people. Bright lights or chaotic settings can cause a person with autism to become overwhelmed and trigger a meltdown. Or clearly, you make their environment clearly labeled and organized and uncluttered. So, and they know what to expect, they're not going to have that stress, and they're not going to have behavior or as many behaviors. People with autism are often better at processing and learning from pictures and listening to someone than listening to someone speak. Sometimes language can be so overwhelming, and you start, giving a kid a bunch of orders in a row, and they're not going to hear you. They're just going to shut that down. So be careful with that. Sometimes too many words are too confusing and overstimulating for a person with autism. A child with autism may not respond to people and may avoid eye contact like we saw in that video. And they may seem to be withdrawn. Look at some behaviors typically seen in autism. Children with autism may focus on one item for long periods of time, may fix and have a narrow range of objects and interests. A person with autism sometimes can be inflexible about routines and engage in ritualistic behavior, but it's trying to get in there and make them more flexible. And I think a lot of times if you can bring anxiety levels down, that can help too. And a person with autism may perform repetitive movements such as rocking or flapping. The child may also use language in a very sing-song repetitive manner also.
Perfect. Thank you. And while we're talking about that, too, a motto to really remember is accept me as me. I have talents, help me find them, look for my strengths and use them to help me learn. Don't pressure me. Don't tell me what I can't do, and don't try to fix me. Just help me make life predictable. And so we also have handouts on functional behavior assessments that go a little bit deeper into behavior and what that looks like in the school environment. And we also do have 2 trainings that discuss behavior at the Ohio Coalition as well. Before we go into the next slide, and I know I'm going to hand this over to you, Erin, but I would encourage you as parents to find out what those sensory, when a child has sensory processing disorder or sensory integration disorder, find out what areas they're overly sensitive in or where they need more. That has been extremely helpful for us with my daughter, knowing that she lacks that proprioceptive input. Is helpful in what we need to do to front load her in situations. I cannot tell you how much we rely on knowing what her sensory triggers are. So go ahead, Erin. And we are at the 10-minute mark. So we're going to just touch on each of these slides a little bit.
Yeah, so sensory systems for many people that are on the spectrum, these are a lot of times very heightened. So very heightened, hearing. They can hear 10 times more than we can, and touch and feeling and hug and smelling. I know my son couldn't even walk into a restaurant because it would be so overwhelming. That proprioception is how your body's position and the body's ability to sense movement and where you are and location. I know taste can be overwhelming. A lot of kids, food can be a tough one with the different, tastes. Sight, and really with sight, a place can be too bright, and that they really need to bring that down. That the light can be too much for them, and then that vestibular movement and balance can be off also, and have some issues with that. So.
Yeah, and we're not going to go too deep in here. But when we're talking about strategies and sensory needs, and some of you may have heard this if you've taken your child to an occupational therapist, there's a lot around with sensory diets, and I think I touched on that a little bit. Some of those things that help my daughter with her needing that proprioceptive input was swimming, pushing heavy objects, carrying things, and there's so many ways to do that where it doesn't make that the individual look different or stand out. If you have a great OT or a great occupational therapist, they'll help you with that. But just like Erin said, some react strongly, some underreact to sensory issues. So that's why, and I love this visual of the sensory diet and all those different things that you can do to consider. And I think, again, you touched on a lot of these. Consider the lighting, texture, temperature, and all that. And then we'll touch a little bit on the cognitive piece.
So almost half of children identified with ASD have average or above average intellectual ability. Many individuals that autism may learn more slowly than their peers. Accurate assessment may be difficult. Cognitive ability should not limit the opportunity to learn. Assessment validity can be difficult to collect. Examiners may consistently question whether they've obtained scores that reflect the cognitive potential or the qualitative impairments in communication that are typical of autism. To address these challenges, examiners may often need to make testing accommodations, and maybe front-loading expectations can help in getting better results. Difficulty adjusting to environmental changes or changes in routine make it difficult for a student to perform at their best. It would be important to familiarize that student with the examiner's testing room before beginning a formal assessment. That can really change assessments if a kid is stressed out.
Yep. Exactly. No, really all those factors take place. So I am just going to show, we have 5 minutes. So I'm going to show this and we're probably going to wrap it up here.
Okay.
But this is the last part of Taylor Crow's story.
When you meet someone with autism, the behavior and communication difficulties make it seem like we don't have emotions. Not having emotions and not showing emotions are two very different things. I know happiness and sadness and joy and anger and contentment and fear and love. Even though people with autism don't show it, it doesn't mean we don't feel it. The word autism comes from the Greek word that means self. Autism was given that name because autistic people tend to withdraw and end up by themselves a lot. But you know what? Being around other people is important for someone with autism. When I was young, my parents figured out that having friends was very important. It taught me how to act around other people. Mom and Dad made it a point to have me around other people a lot. They talked to parents, teachers, kids at my school, and kids at my church about how to be friends with me. Because of things like this, in spite of my autism,
Oh, I apologize. Well, let's see if we can get it back to where he was.
with me. Because of things like this, in spite of my autism,
There we
it
go.
turned out that
Pretty
I
good.
wasn't alone
Yeah.
very much. I learned how to be a kid by being around other kids, by having a circle of friends. Many individuals with autism have what are called splinter skills, things they are really good at. One of mine is called calendar calculation. Calculating days doesn't seem like a very practical skill, but it really is. It helped me meet a lot of people. What days were you born on?
I was born on October 6th, 1977.
Thursday.
And I was born on July 1st, 1974.
Monday. My family always encouraged my interest in art. While I was still in high school, I showed samples of my artwork to some people at my local newspaper and got a job as a cartoonist for them. After high school, for over a year, I worked harder than ever on my drawing and painting skills to put together a portfolio for my application to the California Institute of the Arts.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, we are going to, I think they were just going to show a picture. Let me just see if we can get back there.
Art has helped bring me and other people, and it gave people ways to interact with people for me. It gave me ways to interact with people, and it gave people ways to interact with me. Art has helped bring me and other people together. CalArts chooses students based on one thing: the quality of the work in their portfolios. My work was cut out for me, but becoming an animator had been my dream since I was 9, so I put everything I had into my work. I knew that many students had to apply 2, 3, or 4 times before they could get into CalArts, and a lot of them never made it. I really wanted to go to school there. Applying to CalArts was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was important to me. I put all my effort into it. I made it.
And so we're not going to really have time to go, really deep into the educational methodologies. But, we could just touch and say that there is not one single program, and there should not be one single program, especially when we're looking at methodologies. It should be based on the unique needs of the individual. Some of the things that you can do is just encourage self-advocacy and listen. Always provide an inclusive environment. And know that there is always help available. I remember I said that we would have that phone number, and here it is. And if you call this phone number, this will go to our intake referral specialist, Martha Laze. And I know some of you had some questions, and she will put you with the right individual.
Right.
We have a list of parent mentors of Ohio that you can go to. A great source of information is OCECD, Milestones, and the Autism Society of Ohio. And there are also OOD, the county boards, ODJFS, and Social Security for other outside agencies that you may need. And with that being said, we are actually don't have time for that. We just want to say in summary that our services are at no cost to parents, and our purpose here at the Ohio Coalition is to support families of children with disabilities. With that being said, I'm going to hand it back over to Mark.
All right. Thank you very much, Tammy and Aaron. That was great. And that will wrap it up. We have to jump off here to do our individual guidance sessions, but I'll remind everybody in the chat, you'll see the link to register for other workshops next month. We're going to do a school choice for parents of special needs children. And that'll be done by Albite Weicker. And at the same link, of course, you'll have a recording to this workshop that we did today. That'll be posted by 5 p.m. today. And we have a recordings of all of our workshops. If you've missed any or weren't able to attend or want to watch a workshop again, you can do that. Everything listed at the same link. So thanks again, Tammy and Aaron.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank you
having
everyone
us.
for joining us today.
Yeah, and we'll see you next month.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.